women's history today. It is actually Women's History Month, so that's just how it falls into our schedule of presentation number 30-something. But a look at women's history, pretty much. Lots of different stuff, kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And some of this stuff will be familiar to y'all who've listened to this before or been in the other presentations. But we're going to start, as we tend to usually do, with the Native Americans. And we're going to look at the Timucua for just a couple of minutes. But we've talked about this group from time to time for the last several months, it seems, with various things. But Themagona is what the name comes from, meaning my enemy. And that was from the Native American groups on the coast. It said my enemy lives there. They lived in this entire region. But what I want to point out kind of, besides the fact that they're extinct now, but talk about Timucuan life as it revolves around the women. Because in this culture, they were hunter-gatherers, but also farmers. And they plant, as you can see in these pictures, things like corn, maize, squash, beans, those kinds of things. But the women, the Timucuan women, basically spent most of their days taking care of the children. They prepared the meals. They would hunt small game. They would do things like tend to the huts, the houses, and they actually would make important decisions about agriculture, marriage, and disagreements. So that's something a little different than what you would see in other cultures, even Native American cultures. They had more daily tasks, so they had more to do during the day, and it usually lasted longer, but their work was not as intensive, it was definitely not as dangerous. They were not out hunting the wild game, the big stuff. They were hunting small things that could not kill and eat them. Now, with Timucuan life, generally speaking, they were monogamous. One husband, one wife, but the chiefs were a little different. They could have 2 or 3 or 4 wives. So there were perks of being the chief. The other thing was they were one of these cultures that were matrilineal. So succession passed through the woman's side. For instance, a chief, his heirs were not his own kids, but his nephews and his nieces through his sister. So that was different than a lot of what we're used to in Western culture. It was the kid, the son, or the grandson, perhaps daughter, that would get it. In Timucuan life, it was the nieces and nephews through his sister. So basically, once they married, the couple would join the sister of the wife's clan, not his clan. And again, that's very contrary to what Western culture is. This was something different about the Timucuans. Now, one of the other interesting things, and this is not probably unique to the Timucua, was when women had just given birth, they had separate huts set aside just for that purpose of giving birth. The men could have no contact with them during that period, and they were confined to the huts. Basically, they could not leave these huts, nor could the women eat seafood or meat during this time after birth, and they had to use a different fire than everybody else. So they were set aside, and you can read similar things like the Old Testament with the Jews and those kinds of things, but Native American life was a little bit different because of that. For recreation, the women did not have as many choices as the men. They pretty much would do ritual dances. They were not allowed to participate in these the sports, as we would call them today, things like hoops and such that they would do, throwing the bows and arrows and javelins and all those kinds of things. The women were not allowed to participate in those. So pretty much their recreation was dancing. Now, Timucuan warfare, we've talked about this before, I know, and we talked about how they declared war was basically by putting some hair on an arrow at the end of an arrow and then planting it in front of the village they wished to attack. That was basically their warning, hey, we're about to attack you, get your warriors out, be prepared to fight. And so that's what they did. Now, those wars were very short. They did not last long. Usually they were over after a few guys died. It's like, all right, we killed 5 of your guys, we're good, we're gonna go home. One of the reasons they did it was to protect their hunting lands. It's like, you're encroaching on what we've been using as our lands. I mean, Native American ideas are a little different than ours, but the lands we have been using, these are the ones we've been using, you use your own, and you've encroached on that, so we're going to attack you to stop you. But the other reason was basically to capture women, and that was so they would have somebody to marry. I joke about, you don't want to marry your sister, that It's fine, you don't have to. Go attack the neighboring village and get you a woman to marry. But you know, this is one of the reasons they would attack, was to bring basically fresh blood into the camp. Moving ahead, we look at Spanish era, and we've talked about this in our section on ghosts, the Santa Fe River ghost. So basically after DeSoto and his men came through Florida in the 1500s, about 75 years later, the Spanish started to colonize the interior of Florida, including the areas, what's now Suwannee County. It was on the Camino Real, the Royal Road, that went between Pensacola and St. Augustine. And there were a lot of folks that lived here. Now these, not really a lot, there were some folks that lived here, but a lot of these colonists had to endure, they were on the frontier. You didn't have modern medicine, modern conveniences available to them, even their own conveniences in their home countries, they didn't really have. So they were living on the frontier. They were eking out a meager existence, you could say. And so one of the story goes that near Branford on the Santa Fe River, there was a female colonist, Spanish colonist, who just was not happy. She had found a lover, and she wanted to elope with him. She wanted to leave her husband and her kids, but her lover rejected her, so she shot him, killed him, went back home, drowned her kids in the river, and then jumped in after them. And so supposedly her ghost haunts the Santa Fe River even today. And we've talked about that one before. But it's women's history, so this is something with a woman. Rebecca Charles, one of our early American settlers, she and her husband Reuben were probably the first American settlers that settled actually in Suwannee County. And by 1824, they had a trading post and a ferry crossing the Suwannee River at what's now Charles Springs, which is named for them. And they were they were friendly with the Native Americans that lived in the area, the Seminoles by this point, who had superseded the Timucua, who had moved off and died off. But there were a lot of issues, lots of fighting, but their little inn and their trading post was never attacked by the Seminole Indians. However, Reuben Charles was killed at some point while he was walking along the river. Different dates, 1835, 1836, 1840. I've heard different dates, but our records, we don't have records in Suwannee County that far back. And the territorial records are not quite complete in those kinds of matters. But basically he was killed at one point while walking along the river. But Rebecca, his wife, continued to operate the ferry and the trading post and those kinds of things for many years. In 1840, we know that she was operating the ferry because the Florida legislature authorized her to basically continue those operations that had been started by her husband and herself 15, 16 years before. So she continued to operate that ferry. And even in 1842, as the Second Seminole War is going on, starting to wind down, this ferry post, this trading post and ferry crossing was important, and there were federal troops stationed there, American troops stationed there, because it was basically the connection between East and West Florida, there at the Suwannee River. And so there were soldiers stationed there, but after the war ended later that year, basically, things kind of returned to normal. But then 10 years later, Rebecca Charles, on January 25th, she was shot and killed while she was standing on her front porch. Don't know who did it. That was the era that we were parts of Columbia County, and their records are missing from that period because they had a few fires, 4 or 5 different fires that destroyed the courthouses. So we don't know the details of this, but that she did die at that point because that's her tombstone. That's still there at Charles Springs, or close to Charles Springs. The suggestion is that it was a white settler who was not happy with the fact that she had been friendly to the Indians, to the Native Americans. Don't know that for sure, that's just what I've read, that's what I've seen. And even their daughter, Mary, died an unnatural death because as a teenager, apparently what happened was, as the stipulation goes with the family, the Indians would not kill them if they saw that red scarf that they were wearing. And one day, the daughter Mary rushed out to the stagecoach to get the mail, because she was a teenager, you know how they are. And she forgot to put on the scarf, and the Indian shot her. That's the story anyway. She is buried out there at the cemetery along with several other family members. Now that we're still in this era, this pre-statehood era, in this era of the Second Seminole War, these are not the only women that are in Suwannee County at the time. As you have troops moving in and out, you've got a lot of other women that come through with them, spouses and such. And two of them are here, Ellen Brown and Corrine Aldridge. In 1837, which was basically right after the war had started, they moved down from New York to Florida, along with a sister, well, the two sisters, along with their brother and their two aunts. Basically, their parents had died. They are trying to start over a new life. So they move into Florida, and they live in the Jacksonville area, around Tallahassee and in between. So around here, they are well-educated women, very educated. They are moving around with the governor and the highest members of society, but they're here at one point in Suwannee County, which is not the highest of society at that time. And Ellen Brown writes about this area. She says, the country folk that she met in the Suwannee River area were made of clay indeed. They are the most squalid and miserable looking creatures in the world. I guess we should probably take offense to that. So 2 years later, her sister is coming through and living at Suwannee Springs with her Army surgeon husband. And they settle at Suwannee Springs, and basically she is living, Suwannee Springs being one of the larger communities at that time, which doesn't say much for Suwannee County. But basically she's living in a room that's adjoining a store that's also the post office, the bar room, and the center of all the public events in Suwannee Springs. And she wrote, my ears are constantly assailed by inquiries for letters, oaths, and curses of disappointment, badly read extracts from the different newspapers, cracker remarks, chicken fights, horse races, betting and bullying, country politics, and horse laughs. I only hope that I may not degenerate. So that was one of the letters she wrote. In another letter, she's kind of saddened by the fact that where she is living is basically, quote, a miserable collection of a few log cabins with little to recommend it as an abiding place, save the absence of mosquitoes and the virtues of the spring water. And then later on, in another letter, she says, quote, I have known so much disappointment that I have ceased to expect good things. God sees fit to punish me, and I try not to murmur, yet I know not what I have done that every wish of my heart should be denied me. So she did not like living in Suwannee County, unfortunately. But again, frontier times, wartime, beyond that, it was not a great life for people living, and especially women living at that point, with this constant fear of Seminole attacks and depredations and stuff. But again, very educated women from New York that moved down here and wrote. A lot of their letters still exist. I think there was a book that came out several years ago. Because basically their brother ended up moving into Paris, Mandeville, I believe was his name. And they would write back and forth for years. And so a lot of these letters were collected and saved. So it's very interesting to read through the book. The library may have it or have access to it. I don't recall the name of it. All right, so we moved past the territorial era. Florida becomes a state in 1845. We have more people moving into Suwannee County. Then in 1861, we have the Civil War. The Civil War ends in 1865, and a lot of Northerners moved down from the north into Florida, into the South in general, also into Florida, but specifically even in Suwannee County. So, one of them is John and Nancy Parsley, and they basically moved to this new community that's only been around for a few years called Live Oak, that was established on the Pensacola and Georgia Railroad. And in 1866, John moves down from Ohio first, sets up basically a sawmill business and some other associated businesses after purchasing thousands of acres. And he basically lays out downtown Live Oak as we know it. So Ohio Avenue is named from where they came from. He was originally from before Ohio, New York, and Massachusetts. So they moved several different places before moving ultimately to Florida. But Ohio Avenue is named after where they came from. Parsley Street named after the family. Howard Street is named after one of their sons. Wilbur Street, another son. Pretty much again, downtown Live Oak as we know it is named from the Parsley family. So John moves first. But interestingly, when you look at our court records, the clerk of court records, actually the deeds are not to John Parsley, but they're to Nancy Parsley, which is kind of interesting in itself. And from all the records I've been able to find and research about the family, it seems like Nancy had the better business sense. John had gained and lost a couple fortunes, which is part of the reason they had moved to different states. Nancy partially was well off, well educated. Her family was bigwigs, but it seems like she had even more business sense than her husband. And so when they moved here, first he built a house very quickly for them, and the family moved to Suwannee County, to Live Oak. He died in 1868 of probably malaria, some kind of fever-related thing, but it sounds like malaria. But he died, but Nancy continued to operate the various businesses, whether it's a sawmill or whatnot, but she also started donating a lot of property for churches, for schools. Let's see, the Presbyterian Church, First Baptist Church, donated to the school board, donated to the county commissioners, even the African American community she would donate to. She donated the land for Ebenezer African Methodist Episcopal Church, for the African Baptist Church, donated the property for Brown's Theological Seminary, which became later Edward Waters College, property for the first public school in Live Oak, just all kinds of property she was donating out of the many thousands of acres that they had purchased. She also, in 1868, not long after John had died, she proposed the location of the county courthouse where it still is today, and was able to get that worked out. Now, it helped that it was across the street from their house. Made it easy to do business. She just had to walk across the street. We also have our records showing where she won a lawsuit, a blackmail lawsuit against Nelson Connor, who was a businessman, a Baptist preacher, and the clerk of the court at the time. And basically she sued him for blackmail, and she won. And within a short time, basically she took over his hotel, and she operated several hotels, or owned several hotels. She didn't really operate them, she just owned them. So lots of things she owned, lots of things she did. Very influential female settler of Suwannee County. Brown Theological Seminary, she donated basically 10 acres or so on March 5th, 1872. North of Duval Street, pretty much in where part of John Hill Park is, the back part of that is now today. And that was where this Brown Theological Seminary was going to be, which was going to be one of our 2 African American colleges. And it was started, it was built, they were well underway of finishing construction, and then there was a few things happening, things like scandals, fires, a financial panic of 1873, a hurricane pretty much just said, we're done. We're gonna close up shop and go somewhere else. So 10 years later, that school reopened in Jacksonville, and it's called Edwards Waters College today. But again, this was partly due to Nancy partially freely donating a lot of property. Louisville. Louisville was settled in and around 1878. By 1886, had a population of 75 people. So not a tiny, tiny little place, but not big by any means. Colonel Washington Lafayette Irvin was the guy who started it. He lived in the area, he operated a ferry, he operated a lot of different things, grist mills, sawmills, a lot of stores in Louisville and around Louisville. And he named it after his 5-year-old daughter at the time, whose name was Laura, L-U-R-A, sometimes L-A-U-R-A, but Laura. Unfortunately, Laura did not live to adulthood. She was horribly burned in a dormitory fire, basically on Christmas Day, 1888. She was 15 years old, and she died the next day. And she is buried in close to Louisville at the Ivy McIntosh Cemetery. And it's interesting, at the clerk of court, we've got those probate records, and we've got the records of the coffin. We've got the records of all the doctor's bills trying to save her, those kinds of things. Kind of sad, but it's part of our history. It's kind of brings it home when you start reading, because when I've gone through that, and I think last year I went through it in a little more detail, and you read from where she was staying, it looks like White Springs was where the dormitory was. And so you see these back and forth receipts and letters from the headmistress over there, sending it to her guardians at that point, because her parents were dead, about expenses for the month and all that kind of stuff. And when the last one was, she's off to basically can't wait to have her back when she comes back, and then she dies in a fire. So kind of sad, but it's part of those records that we've got. So on the left side is downtown Louisville in the 1890s or so, and that guy's got a shotgun, so maybe he was the justice of the peace or something. On the right-hand side of the picture of the Dr. Perry McIntosh house, which was built in the late 1800s and still exists today. Dr. Perry McIntosh did a lot of different things. Obviously, as a doctor, he's a doctor. But he actually was, he and his wife were Laura's guardians after her parents died. Perry was a close cousin to W.L. Irvin, and his wife was a sister of Laura's mother. So they were close related, but they were the guardian. And it looks like Laura went back to this home. This is where she actually died, was in that home, because he was a doctor trying to take care of her. Other communities with ties to women. Branford. Robert Ivy named Branford after the birthplace of his good friend Henry Plant, one of those two big Henrys we've talked about that built railroads through Florida in the late and early 1900s. Robert Ivy had a daughter named Bertha, or Berta, depending on who you look at, and he basically named his most famous riverboat after her. The Belle of the Suwannee is named after her. She was the belle of her father's eyes, and so that was named after her. She lived in the area. She continued to live in the area. That's a picture of her in the middle. And there on the right is her with her husband, F.H. George, who became mayor of Branford. And even after his death, she lived for many, many years and was a social force. I mean, she was there. She was big into Branford up until her death. And some of these photos I got from one of her descendants, Bobby George. He allowed me to use some of these pictures. So, the George family is still in Florida, North Florida, even today. Live Oak by the 1890s, early 1900s, Suwannee County Live Oak, we were seeing tremendous growth, basically a doubling of population. Live Oak had become one of the largest cities in the state by early 1900s. You've got lots of folks living here. You've got lots of manufacturing, lots of people making money. You've got hotels. You've got commercial businesses. You've got a lot of brick buildings that are being constructed. And as that's really starting to pick up the pace in the 1880s, 1890s, you see a group of citizens of Live Oak come together in 1888 to have a photograph made. So you see this photograph. This is in Live Oak, not sure exactly where. Downtown, because it's brick, some of the brick buildings by that point. So some of the folks in this picture are Enoch McDaniel. There's a Kemp in here. The Frank McClellan is here. B.W. Helmanson is there on the top right. That is the B.W. Helmanson of B.W. Helmanson and Sons. That's the original one. The front row, there's Laura White. There's Mary McClellan. There's Texas Overstreet. Dan McClellan. One of the kids, I believe, is Dan McClellan. But these women are spouses of a lot of the prominent men in the community at this time. Some of the Whites, McClellans, Overstreets, those kinds of things. I think the one in the middle, maybe Texas Overstreet, who I believe was the daughter of Dr. Silas Overstreet. But I could be wrong, don't quote me on that. But anyway, some of the prominent citizens of Live Oak in 1888. Late 1800s, early 1900s, we've got lots of women that are owning businesses in and around not just Live Oak, but Suwannee County, but I've got more information on Live Oak, so that's why I tend to focus more on Live Oak, because we've got so much more existing documentation. But one of them was the popular Bon Ton store. It was a clothing and millinery, which is hats and stuff, women's hats and all. This is an article, or part of an article from 1906 by Mrs. C.W. Bach. She was the owner. And she says, some of the things they own, gingham for shirts, $2 hats for $1. So, half off. So, 3-corner George Washington hats for babies, girls, and misses. Those kinds of things. Now, her husband owned a lot of different businesses. One of them was a logging operation called Bosch and Hagen. And they operated, because of their operations and how far out they went, they operated old railroad engines. They would slap down some railroad ties to get to their next property, send an old engine down there to get it, and then pick them up and move them and that kind of stuff. So that happened a lot. Well, they own property not just in Suwannee County, but also Lafayette County. And so one of the times where they're trying to transport one of their engines from Suwannee to Lafayette or vice versa, the engine falls into the river around Lurville. And because it's an old engine, it's one of these passenger engines that's been retired and it's being used for logging operations, they decide it's not worth pulling up, so they just leave it there. And it stays there for about 80 years or so until in 1979, it was raised and today is over in Tallahassee. Probably the oldest existing locomotive in the United States. So because it was old back then, they didn't raise it. And now it's a piece of history. But that was Mrs. Bosch's husband. Women's Club, organized 1902. It's met in various locations over the years. The ones I've been able to find include the original public library, which was on the courthouse lot, pretty much where the property appraiser, that part of the building is today. They also operated an old house, which itself was an old house. Then they bought another old home on Duval Street. That's where they operated for a few decades. And they bought that house in 1920. So, 1915 picture here on the left, I'm going to assume, without any other information, that that was the old library, which was the old converted house, there on the courthouse lot. And then in the 1920s picture on the right, that is their newer house they have purchased on Duval Street. It was close to where First Automotive is, just west of that, on Duval Street. That's the house, a picture of the house. And they met there for like 45, 50 years until it was just too old. And so they constructed a new building on the Coliseum property, which is where they still are today. It's on the west side of the Coliseum property with Live with Women's Club. So a lot of the folks in there, I don't think I made a list, I should have, but they're pretty much, these ladies, these pictures here, these ladies and or their husbands were some of the most prominent folks in Live Oak and Suwannee County at this point. A lot of them, very prominent. Other prominent women in Suwannee County's history. Ruby Strickland. Ruby Estelle Jordan, as she was born in Reynolds, Georgia in 1886. She was the daughter of Wiley Jordan. She had at least 4 siblings that I've been able to find. In 1898, the family moved to Florida. They moved to Suwannee County and to Live Oak, which was growing at that point leaps and bounds. But then her father became postmaster of Dowling Park, basically the first postmaster of Dowling Park in 1906. Before that, it was called Hudson upon the Suwannee. But he became a postmaster, and he served there for a couple of years. But then he decided to go into traveling sales. So he basically gave up his postmaster job. And Ruby, who was 22 years old at this point, becomes the postmistress. And it takes a few years to get that approved, but basically she was confirmed on October 29th, 1909. So she served as postmistress of Dowling Park for just a couple of years, and then she got married. And she married a guy by the name of Dr. Henry Maddox Strickland, born the same year as her. And he lived in Live Oak, had established a doctor's practice here in Live Oak, and so she moved back to Live Oak from Dowling Park. They had a daughter named Frances Alberta, and I think I'll talk about her maybe later, maybe not. But she married a Hare. She married Horry Hare, who was big into Suwannee County's history. And they actually had a son also named Maddox who died as a teenager. He was born in 1916, died in 1935. But Ruby was very active in social circles. The Live Oak Women's Club, she was one of those members of that. She was its president from 1922 to 1924. She became a member of the Suwannee County Library Board, so she was overseeing the local library, and she also became a school board, Suwannee County School Board trustee. I'll get it out eventually. So I mean, this is a woman doing these things in a time where most women were not looked upon as being able to do this kind of stuff. She was a pioneer in many ways. So in 1920, women get the right to vote throughout the United States. 19th Amendment is passed, and women are also allowed to vote. 1924, just a few short years later, Ruby is elected mayor of Live Oak. She beats out C.L. Bussey, C.R. Wadsworth, and former Mayor Emmy Broome. And she got 214 votes. Wadsworth got 186, Broome got 60, and Bussey got 51. So she beats him outright, and she becomes the first mayor south of the Mason-Dixon line under universal suffrage. There's some qualifiers there, because there were some women in other places before universal suffrage, maybe even in Florida. But she served one term, she went out, but then she served another term from 34 to 35. So 2 non-consecutive terms. But even not being mayor, she was active in politics. 1936, she was a state delegate at large at the Democratic National Convention, where they nominated Franklin Roosevelt for a second time to be president of the United States. That same year, her husband, Dr. Strickland, died. She would then later marry a guy named W.L. Giles of Reidsville, Georgia. He died 12 years after that. Then she married Arthur Gould of St. Petersburg, and he died 7 years after that. So she marries and is widowed 3 different times. She remained in St. Petersburg until 1966, where she came back home to Suwannee County and then moved out to Abbott Christian Village. And she continued living there until her death in 1985. Now her family continued. As I was starting to say earlier, her son-in-law, Horry Hare, was influential in Suwannee County. He became a state senator, and then the grandson, Maddox, became a senator also in the area. 1978, the picture on the right, the picture on the right is from a centennial celebration we had for the centennial of Live Oaks Incorporation. So 1878 incorporated, 1978 you've got the centennial. Ruby is one of the figures that attends, and the guest of honor kind of is Lieutenant Governor Jim Williams, and his plan is to give this nice birthday cake, centennial birthday cake, to the mayor, who at the time is S.T. McDowell. And so he comes, but then when he sees Ruby, because she's basically the first speaker, he presents it to her instead. And so the mayor just gets some cufflinks. That's his consolation prize. So in the cemetery, when you find her grave, she is listed as Ruby Jordan Strickland Giles Gould. Lots of names. So, again, kind of a visionary, women's rights, all these things that had predominantly been men before this point, she's able to break that barrier. Live Oak Garden Club, established 1936 to beautify the community. I think the first focus was on the courthouse grounds, and then they expanded. They first met at the First Baptist Church. They eventually built a brick building on the Coliseum property, and that continues to operate today as the Garden Club. I think it's open to more than women now, but it started out as women only, but just focusing on gardening and those kinds of things. I've got a brown thumb, so it wouldn't help me at all to be a part of that group. My wife was briefly, but brown thumb for me. So now then, the next few things, we'll keep hitting a few things here. Other elected officials in Suwannee County's history. Bessie M. Green becomes the first female property appraiser. She is appointed by the governor in 1939 after her husband, Frank M. Green, dies. So she is appointed, and then she serves, is elected and serves until 1949. I don't have a picture of her. So you can see where she worked. Courthouse. There we go. 1940s. So that was 1939 when she was appointed. Well, in 1941, we get involved in World War II, and so a lot of the men go off to war. So the women step up. They go into working, oftentimes for the very first time working outside of the home. So they're doing farming, they're doing manufacturing, they're doing all kinds of stuff. One of the interesting things I found in our school board minutes here in Suwannee County was in 1943, there was a note that women were first hired to drive school buses, along with some of the high school students themselves. So they were now allowing women to drive buses. So a lot of women went into the workforce during the war, and a lot of them stayed in after the war. Same World War II era, we've got a new primary school being built. It's completed in December of '42, and they name it after Nettie Baisden. Nettie Baisden there on the left was a long-time teacher. She's been teaching since 1907, the primary students. And so they name it in her honor. She's still teaching, and actually then she becomes principal of this school. So she's principal of their own school, named after. It's kind of funny. There's also a social sewing club of Live Oak was established in 1944, the home of Ora Lee Swain, and the purpose is, quote, to bring better social relations with women of the community so they may work together to help others. And their motto is ascending to higher heights of finer womanhood. So they built a clubhouse close to Douglas Center, Douglas High School, 1967. I don't have a picture of it, but that's another women's group that was established in this era. Frances Hare. Frances was the daughter of Ruby Strickland. Thought I had the information here. She was the daughter of Ruby Strickland, so the daughter of that first female mayor in Live Oak. She also becomes the first female tax collector. But she is appointed as tax collector in 1944 because her husband Henry Horry Hare went to war. He basically had been elected tax collector. He went off to fight. And so she was appointed by the governor as a tax collector in his place. She served for a year. He came back. She stopped serving. And as I've already said, Horry eventually served as a state senator a few years later. Let's see. Yeah. So, I mean, this war era, you've got lots of women that are coming into positions of authority, positions of government. Another one is Thelma Thomas Holmes. She becomes our first female superintendent. When her husband, who's Perry Holmes, resigned, his was not to go to war, his was to go to the Florida State Parole Commission. And that was in August of '44. So she served until, basically just a few months, until the newly elected superintendent, Clayton Bass, came into office in January of '45. So that's a picture of her. Her son was Myron Holmes, and he was born later in 1945. He was a long-time city administrator for Live Oak. Branford Women's Club and Suwannee River Women's Club. Basically, the Branford Women's Club was organized October 22nd, 1946 in the home of Mrs. R.L. Wilburn, and their purpose was to encourage civic, home economics, music, art, and benevolent undertakings, and to assist in the advancement of the interest of the community. A lot of stuff to write. That's pretty much what they did. They built the clubhouse in 1961 after meeting in the old agriculture building at Branford High School. They met there for several years, and unfortunately in 2022, basically because of COVID and other stuff, they shut down, transferred all their existing records to the Historical Commission and Museum, so we've got them there today. But that was their building before it was shut down. The Women's Club, the Suwannee River Women's Club, was organized in 1950 as a junior women's club, and then they changed the name in 2000 to the Suwannee River Women's Club, but it looks like according to the documents I found, they shut down in 2011. So I didn't have much about them. Now, I told you I was going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is one of the not so great parts of Suwannee County's history, but Ruby McCollum and I've done a whole presentation on this, so I'm not going to belabor it, but just to talk about, she is somebody that has been influential in Suwannee County's history. So Ruby, born Ruby Jackson, 1909 in Zuber, Florida, close to Ocala. Second child, first daughter of 6 siblings. Very ambitious, very intelligent. Her parents basically helped put her through a private school. She studied nursing, bookkeeping. She eventually married a guy by the name of Sam McCullum. They moved to Live Oak, where Sam ran various businesses. He helped with his brother for insurance, those kinds of things, but they managed, among other things, Bolita, which is the illegal lottery at the time. Ruby supposedly was Sam's bookkeeper, kept track of the books, who was paying on these illegal things. Moved in one of the largest, nicest houses in the community at the time, especially for African American families. And then got involved with Dr. Clifford Leroy Adams, voluntarily or not, is one of those things up for question. But regardless, in 1952, she shot Dr. Adams, who had been elected to the Florida legislature at that point, shot him and killed him, and it became a big deal. And again, we've talked about this in a previous presentation or two, but her story brought a lot of newspapers, a lot of reporters to Live Oak in Suwannee County. So things about racial equality, whites, black mistresses, those kinds of things. So she was found guilty of murder originally. It was then overturned due to a technicality. She served 20 years in Chattahoochee at the State Mental Institution, and then was released and died in 1992, I think. Lots of different things. Lots of things coming out of the trial, lots of issues. And again, we've talked about this before, I'm not gonna go into it too much. Looking through my pages. Yeah, she died in 92. I thought that was the date. So telephones, we've had telephone service in Live Oak especially since early 1900s, way early, under various names. In the 1950s, the Florida Telephone Corporation was sold to Otto Wettstein Jr. and his son Otto III, which became North Florida Telephone Company, which then became Alltel, which then became Windstream, which it is today. But they expanded in the 1950s. They went into the rural areas, not just Live Oak, but way out into Suwannee County, which required more people to work. So they would have these switchboards, and they would put these ladies on switchboards. Y'all remember those? Maybe, maybe not. Anyway. One of those jobs that is no more due to technology, but the museum has some of these switchboards. They actually kind of operate to an extent. The telephone part of it operates anyway, so kids like to go in there and play with them and stuff. But a lot of women were, that was pretty much a woman's job as it was seen in that day. U-2 incident, 1968. Top secret U-2 spy plane was shot down over the Soviet Union. It was flown by Francis Gary Powers. He survived. He was captured. It became a big international incident. Led to an increase in the arms race. This is Gary Powers there beside Kelly Johnson of the Skunk Works factory that produced a lot of top secret things for the military. That's the U-2 behind them. But the tie in Suwannee County is Gary's wife, Barbara, there on the right, was born in Live Oak in 1934. She lived here for a few years while her dad worked on the railroad. He was a telegrapher on the Atlantic coastline before he transferred to, I believe, Georgia. So she was born just off Duval Street in 1934 and lived here for a few years. And then they moved off and she met Gary and got married after that. Well, Gary was released in 1962 in exchange for a Russian spy, and he very quickly filed for divorce from Barbara because he claimed that he had suffered more from her habitual intoxication, cursing, and abuse than he had in a Soviet interrogation in prison. So not the best for her. She apparently was an alcoholic, among other things. But it was interesting to find this information out when I was going through records several, 10, 15 years ago now. Going through some newspapers and seeing all this stuff about the U-2, it's like, okay, I know it's a big deal, but why is the focus on this woman? And I started reading and realized some folks here realized she'd been born here. It's very interesting. Connection to international incidents. We don't usually get that in Suwannee County. But moving ahead, Marjorie Carmichael. She was the first female supervisor of elections. She served from 1969 until she retired in 1996. So we have all these firsts for different things. That's pretty much the rest of this presentation, more or less, is going to be the first in some office. So Marjorie Carmichael first female supervisor elections. Sandra Hass appears to have been the first female school board member. Now, we've already talked about the school board superintendent, Mrs. Holmes, but school board member looks like Sandra Hass is the first one. She was appointed in 1979 and then served through 1982. She was a lawyer for many, many years. Even after she retired, she performed lots of legal duties. She's now deceased. First female county commissioner is the lady there in the middle. That is Vernell Johnson. She was appointed as county commissioner after her husband Lynn, whose nickname was, he went by Jabbo. So his Jabbo Johnson died January of 1982. So she was appointed to finish his term, and then she was reelected. So she served ultimately from 1982 to 1992. That is the groundbreaking of the Suwannee County Jail. So you can see from the angle, you can see part of the First Methodist Church there in the back right. The courthouse will be over here to the left. But in that picture are a lot of elected officials. I see Mayor Knotts there, Judge Kennan, our state senator, the sheriff's there, a lot of different folks. County commissioners pretty much are all in there too. But that was in early 1992 when this picture was made. All right, this one's not elected. Not a good thing. Eileen Wuornos. 1989-1990, 7 men were killed in Florida by this prostitute, nicknamed the Damsel of Death. She initially claimed it was all self-defense, that all these 7 guys had attacked her, and she killed them in self-defense. But eventually it was learned that she had just killed them in cold blood, either to steal money from them, she hated men, those kinds of things. She was found guilty of 6 of the murders. And the only reason she wasn't found guilty of the 7th is because they never found the body. So she was found guilty of 6 of the 7 murders. Suwannee County's tie into this is one of her last victims' vehicles was found in Suwannee County, which means she came through Suwannee County on her murder trip. So kind of scary to think about that. But she was here in Suwannee County. She was executed in 2002, and she was the 2nd female executed in Florida since 1848. So not a good part of Suwannee County's history, but she was here. Altruza Club International. The Live Oak branch was chartered at the First Methodist Church, November 29th, 1990. It is an international pioneer service organization for business and professional women. Many women in this picture, you'd recognize some of them, have served or currently serve in government. For instance, the library. On the left, Miss Betty is the one running the library today. You've got Linda Williams, who supervised elections at the time. You've got Linda Smith, who worked for the judge. I mean, you've got a lot of these folks worked either in the library or at the courthouse or at Christian Village for one of them. So, a lot of folks. Now, the one on the right is Millie Schneider. She is a JA, judicial assistant for one of our judges. And when I first saw this picture, I was kind of intrigued because that's not how she normally dresses. And then I realized that there's, in the background it says Happy Halloween. So she was dressed up for Halloween. So I was wondering why she was dressed like a pirate. All right, other firsts. 2018, Robertina Reed became the City of Live Oak's first female and first African-American female council member. So she served for one term, and then she was defeated. But she was Live Oak's first female elected official, city council person. Jennifer Kirkendall Griffin became Suwannee County's first female county judge. She was put into office in 2023. Continues to serve today. And it's scary when the elected officials like these are younger than me. I went to school with her. She's a year younger than me. But she's been there for a couple of years. And then just this year, Katie Land became the first circuit court female judge from Suwannee County. Now, in the circuit, we do have other females, but she was the first one from Suwannee County. So she was just sworn into office in January, a couple months ago. And she is our first. So lots of firsts for women in Suwannee County, and lots of other things that women in Suwannee County have done over the years. So that's that hour-long presentation, pretty much, almost. Any questions, thoughts, comments? I mean, we know that throughout history, most of history, women have been on the sidelines. History's been written by men, it's been written about men, so there are so many women out there that have done so many good things that we have no idea about today. And even in Suwannee County's history, there are a lot of women out there that they're the backbones of society. We just don't write about it or read about it usually. So these are just a few in Suwannee County's history that have made a difference, good or bad in some cases. All right, thank you, I appreciate it.